Picture this scenario for a moment. The lights go out and they don't come back on. Supply chains collapse overnight. And suddenly your neighborhood transforms from a familiar place into something entirely unpredictable. And there you are, standing in your home, looking out at a world that's changed forever, realizing that all those supplies you've carefully stockpiled, all that knowledge you've accumulated, all those plans you've made might not be enough if you're facing this alone, because the harsh reality of any serious collapse scenario is that isolation becomes your greatest enemy. Not the lack of food or water or even security threats, but the crushing weight of trying to survive and rebuild without trusted allies by your side. The truth that most preppers don't want to acknowledge is that the lone wolf mentality, while romantic and self-reliant in theory, becomes a death sentence when you're dealing with sustained crisis, because humans are fundamentally social creatures who have survived and thrived throughout history, not as individuals, but as communities, tribes, and networks of mutual support and shared responsibility. If you're watching this video, chances are you've already recognized this fundamental truth, but you're struggling with the challenge that faces so many of us in the preparedness community. How do you build a trusted network of like-minded people when you're geographically isolated, when your neighbors think you're paranoid, when the general population dismisses the very real threats we're preparing for, or when you're living in an area where finding people who share your values and preparedness mindset feels nearly impossible? This isn't just about having people to help you carry supplies or stand watch during difficult times, though those things matter tremendously. It's about creating a web of relationships that can provide emotional support, shared knowledge, complementary skills, and the kind of strategic thinking that only comes from multiple perspectives working together toward common goals. So if you're ready to stop going it alone and start building the kind of community that can not only survive, but thrive when everything else falls apart, make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because we're going to dive deep into the strategies, the mindset, and the practical steps you need to transform from an isolated prepper into the cornerstone of a resilient, trusted network that can weather any storm. The first thing you need to understand about building a preparedness community is why it's so incredibly difficult in the first place. And this goes far beyond simple geography or population density, because we're dealing with fundamental shifts in how modern society views risk, responsibility, and self-reliance. The general public has become conditioned to believe that someone else will always handle the big problems. The government will provide disaster relief. Corporations will maintain supply chains. Technology will solve resource shortages. And this mindset creates a massive disconnect between people who are actively preparing for disruptions and those who are living as if the current systems will continue indefinitely without any meaningful interruption. When you try to discuss preparedness with most people, you're not just talking about storing food or learning skills. You're challenging their entire worldview about how stable and reliable their environment really is. And that makes them uncomfortable in ways that go far deeper than simple disagreement about practical matters. Add to this the very real concerns about operational security that every serious prepper faces, because the moment you start talking about your preparations, your supplies, your capabilities, you're potentially making yourself a target for people who didn't prepare but know that you did. And this creates a catch-22 situation where the very conversations you need to have to find like-minded people are the same conversations that could compromise your security if you have them with the wrong individuals. The social stigma around preparedness doesn't help either, because despite all the evidence of supply chain vulnerabilities, infrastructure failures, natural disasters, and social unrest that we see regularly in the news, preparing for these realities is still viewed by many as paranoid, extreme, or antisocial behavior rather than prudent risk management and responsible citizenship. Cultural and political divisions make this even more complicated, because preparedness thinking often overlaps with specific political philosophies, religious beliefs, or lifestyle choices. And while these connections aren't universal, they can create barriers when you're trying to find people who share your preparedness values, but might have very different views on other important aspects of life and society. The reality is that you're looking for a very specific combination of characteristics in potential community members. People who acknowledge serious risks to stability, who are willing to take personal responsibility for their own security and survival, who have the discipline and resources to actually prepare rather than just talk about it, who can be trusted with sensitive information about your capabilities and vulnerabilities, and who share enough common values that you can work together effectively under stress without constant conflict about fundamental priorities and decision-making approaches. Once you understand why finding your people is so challenging, the next step is knowing where to look. And this requires thinking strategically about the types of activities, organizations, and communities that naturally attract people with preparedness mindsets, self-reliance values, and practical skill sets. Local churches can be goldmines for finding community-minded people who think about long-term stability, mutual aid, and moral responsibility, especially churches that emphasize stewardship, community service, and traditional values around family and self-sufficiency. And the advantage here is that religious communities already have established frameworks for trust, mutual support, and working together toward common goals that translate directly into preparedness thinking. Homesteading groups, gardening clubs, and agricultural organizations draw people who understand food security, seasonal planning, and the value of producing rather than just consuming. And these folks often have practical skills, rural connections, and mindsets that align naturally with preparedness principles, even if they don't explicitly identify as preppers. Shooting ranges, gun clubs, and hunting organizations are obvious places to find people who take personal security seriously, understand the importance of training and practice, and have experience with firearms that could be crucial in security situations. Plus, these environments naturally filter for people who believe in individual responsibility for personal protection rather than relying entirely on law enforcement response. Ham radio clubs attract people who understand the importance of independent communication systems, who have technical skills and backup power capabilities, and who are already thinking about what happens when normal communication infrastructure fails. And many ham operators are explicitly interested in emergency communication and disaster response scenarios. Online forums can be incredibly valuable for finding local connections, especially localized prepper groups on platforms like Reddit, Discord, MeWe, and specialized preparedness forums, where you can connect with people in your geographic area who are already openly discussing preparedness topics and looking for local community connections. Town hall meetings, community board gatherings, and civic engagement groups might seem like unlikely places to find preppers, but these venues attract people who care deeply about their local community, who want to be involved in decision-making processes, and who are paying attention to local issues and potential problems that could affect everyone in the area. Volunteer opportunities related to emergency response, disaster relief, community resilience, local food banks, or agricultural projects give you chances to work alongside people while observing their attitudes toward community responsibility, crisis response, and practical problem solving under pressure. And these activities let you demonstrate your own reliability and capabilities while building relationships naturally through shared work rather than potentially awkward conversations about preparedness philosophy. Building trust with potential community members is a delicate process that requires patience, observation, and strategic thinking because the people you're evaluating are likely evaluating you just as carefully. And rushing this process, or sharing too much too soon, can destroy opportunities for solid relationships while potentially compromising your own security. The first thing you want to watch for is consistency between what people say and what they actually do, because anyone can talk about being prepared or claim to share your values, but you need to see evidence of follow-through, practical skills, actual preparations, and the kind of disciplined thinking that translates talk into action when situations get difficult. Start with low-risk activities that let you observe people's character, decision-making processes, and reliability without exposing your own capabilities or vulnerabilities. Shared training sessions, group meetups focused on skill development, community projects, or social gatherings where you can see how people interact with others, handle disagreements, manage stress, and respond to unexpected challenges or changes in plans. Use small trust-building exchanges to test the waters and gradually increase the level of mutual dependence and vulnerability. Maybe you start by sharing basic preparedness articles or discussing general concepts, then move to small gear swaps or tool lending. Then perhaps shared purchases of bulk supplies or group training expenses, and gradually work up to more significant collaborations that require real trust and mutual reliance. The key principle here is gradual exposure of capabilities and vulnerabilities rather than jumping straight into deep discussions about your specific preparations, storage locations, defensive capabilities, or detailed survival plans. Because trust needs to be earned incrementally through repeated positive interactions rather than assumed based on shared interests or similar philosophies. Pay attention to how potential community members handle information you share with them. Do they keep confidences? Do they gossip about other people's business? Do they ask probing questions that seem designed to gather intelligence rather than build relationships? And do they reciprocate with their own vulnerable information, or do they just collect what you're willing to share without offering anything meaningful in return? Watch for red flags in their behavior patterns, financial stability, family relationships, and social connections, because people who can't manage their own lives effectively, who have unstable relationships with family and friends, who have substance abuse issues, or who seem to thrive on drama and conflict, are not going to be reliable when serious stress hits your community. And you need people who can stay focused on practical solutions rather than creating additional problems. The vetting process also needs to include some assessment of their actual skills, resources, and capabilities, not because you're looking for people who have everything figured out, but because you need to understand what each person brings to the table and whether their contributions will be valuable enough to justify the risks and responsibilities that come with including them in your trusted network. Once you've identified and vetted potential community members, the real work begins in terms of creating an actual functional network that can operate effectively when normal systems break down. And this requires moving beyond casual friendships or shared interests into the realm of serious strategic planning, defined roles and responsibilities, and regular training that builds both practical capabilities and the kind of seamless teamwork that only comes from repeated practice under realistic conditions. The optimal size for a core preparedness group seems to be somewhere between 3 and 12 people, counting family units rather than just individuals, because this gives you enough diversity of skills and resources to handle most challenges, while keeping the group small enough that communication, coordination, and consensus building remain manageable even under stress when quick decisions need to be made, and everyone needs to stay informed about rapidly changing situations. Each person or family unit in your network should have clearly defined primary roles based on their existing skills, interests, and resources. Maybe, for example, one person becomes your medical specialist who takes responsibility for training, supplies, and protocols related to healthcare and trauma response. Another focuses on security matters, including training, equipment, and tactical planning. Someone else handles food production, preservation, and nutrition planning. Another manages communications equipment and protocols, and so on, with the understanding that everyone cross-trains in basic versions of all critical skills so that losing any one person doesn't create catastrophic gaps in your group's capabilities. Regular training sessions need to become a non-negotiable part of your group's routine, not just individual skill practice, but actual scenario-based exercises where you work through realistic problems as a team. Practice your communication protocols, test your equipment and procedures, identify weaknesses in your plans, and build the kind of instinctive coordination that lets you function smoothly, even when stress levels are high and conditions are chaotic or dangerous. These training sessions should include everything from basic skills practice like first aid, radio communication, and equipment maintenance to complex scenario planning, where you work through potential threats like extended power outages, supply chain disruptions, civil unrest, natural disasters, or security threats that require coordinated response from multiple people with different specialized roles. Communication protocols are absolutely critical because when normal phone and internet systems fail, your group needs predetermined ways to contact each other, share information, coordinate activities, and maintain situational awareness. And this means everyone needs compatible radio equipment, established check-in schedules, backup meeting locations, and signal plans that let you communicate important information even when electronic communication isn't possible or isn't secure. Your network also needs fallback plans for different scenarios because the same response that works for a short-term power outage won't be appropriate for a long-term economic collapse or a security situation that requires everyone to relocate quickly. So you need multiple contingency plans with clearly defined triggers that tell everyone when to implement different levels of response depending on the nature and severity of whatever crisis you're facing. Geographic isolation, it presents some unique challenges for building preparedness communities. But it doesn't make community building impossible. It just means you gotta use different strategies, get creative, and accept that your network might look real different from that ideal image of having all your trusted folks living within walking distance of your home base. Digital communities with emergency meetup plans can be incredibly valuable when you're dealing with folks spread out over a wide area, because, honestly, modern communication technology lets you keep in regular touch, share information, coordinate planning, and build real relationships with people who might be hours away during normal times, but could still reach you or meet at predetermined locations when a crisis hits, and normal travel patterns just don't matter anymore. The idea of prepper pen pals or mutual assistance agreements works especially well for folks who are isolated in rural areas or small communities where local options are limited. You can, for example, set up relationships with people in different regions who agree to provide mutual support during emergencies. Maybe someone in your area offers rural retreat space for city preppers during big city emergencies, while those urban allies provide city resources, connections, or even temporary shelter for rural folks who need access to medical care, specialized equipment, or other city-based resources during their own tough times. Even if your closest preparedness allies are several hours away, it's still worth identifying and nurturing those relationships. Because crisis situations often change transportation options and travel times in ways you just can't predict. Major highways might be blocked or dangerous, but back roads and alternate routes could actually make it easier to reach folks who are technically farther away, but more accessible through less used paths or routes that aren't being watched by authorities who might be restricting travel. Satellite groups are another approach to these geographic challenges, where you keep coordination and communication going with a main preparedness network while also building local fallback relationships with folks who might not be hardcore preppers, but who have useful skills, equipment, or local know-how that could be real valuable in a crisis. Maybe neighbors who aren't as committed but can still pitch in when it counts. The key is building multiple layers of community connections instead of putting all your energy into finding that perfect local group, because the reality is, your most trusted allies might be spread out more than you'd like. But you can still create effective mutual support networks through careful planning, regular communication, and a little creative thinking about how to use the connections you can actually build, rather than waiting around for perfect ones that might never show up. Remote coordination does require more sophisticated communication planning and more detailed contingency planning than local groups, since you can't just rely on face-to-face meetings to clear up misunderstandings or handle complicated stuff. But the basics of trust building, skill development, and mutual support still matter just as much, even when your community is connected by radio waves and internet instead of just living down the road. Security considerations for preparedness communities, well, they go way beyond just physical security measures. We're talking about operational security, information management, interpersonal dynamics, and finding that delicate balance between keeping trust within your group and protecting everybody from outside threats that could target your resources, capabilities, or even just your knowledge. Non-disclosure agreements or just plain old verbal trust pacts help set clear expectations about what information stays in the group and what can be shared with outsiders. And yeah, legal NDAs might sound a little much for informal groups, but having honest conversations about information security and mutual commitments to confidentiality helps prevent misunderstandings and accidental leaks that could put everyone's safety at risk. Background checks or checking folks out through mutual contacts gets more important as your group grows and your resources and know-how expand, because the risk of letting the wrong person in goes up big time when you're dealing with real assets, detailed knowledge about where people live and what they can do, and info that could be used to target folks during a crisis. Signal plans, watch rotations, and lockdown protocols. These all need to be figured out and practiced before they're actually needed, because emergencies don't give you time to sort out communication procedures or coordinate defense on the fly. Everybody's got to know what to do and how to do it, without needing a long discussion. These security measures have to cover both outside threats, like people looking to take what you've got, and internal threats, like group members who might turn unreliable, get conflicted loyalties, or whose situation changes in a way that puts everyone else at risk. Having conflict resolution structures and clear group decision-making rules is just crucial for keeping the group together and stopping little disputes from blowing up into big divisions that could tear your community apart or create lasting bad blood between folks who need to trust each other with their lives. Regular security reviews and updates make sure your protections grow as your group evolves, as outside conditions change, and as new threats or weak spots show up through experience, training, or just changes in the world around you. The goal is to build a security culture where everyone knows their role, feels comfortable speaking up about concerns, and understands that the group takes security seriously, without getting so paranoid that it ruins the trust and cooperation that make community survival possible in the first place. Recognizing and steering clear of dangerous people is honestly one of the most important skills for building a trusted preparedness community, because the wrong person in your network can compromise everyone's security, stir up internal conflict that wrecks group effectiveness, or even become a direct threat to members and their families, especially when kicking out problem folks becomes a whole lot harder and riskier during a crisis. Folks who ask too many detailed questions about your specific preps, storage spots, defenses, or resources too early on are showing patterns that look more like intelligence gathering than real relationship building, because trustworthy people get the need for operational security and respect boundaries about sensitive info until trust is built up over time through steady, positive interactions. Deep political or religious incompatibilities that lead to fundamental disagreements about priorities, decision-making, or what solutions are even acceptable can tear your group apart when things get tense and you need quick decisions without a lot of debate. So, while having a range of opinions can be good, you really need core values to line up around things like individual rights, community responsibility, handling conflict, and how leadership works, enough to survive the pressure of an actual crisis. Folks who always take resources, help, or support from the group without giving back their fair share are showing selfishness and a lack of community spirit that'll only get worse when resources run low and every contribution counts for survival. And truth is, these habits rarely get better under stress. They usually get worse as people focus more on themselves and less on the group. Unstable behavior, substance abuse, unmanaged mental health issues, or a history of violence, crime, or financial trouble create risks that go way beyond just that one person and can endanger the whole group, especially when stress is high and folks' worst sides come out. People who seem to love drama, gossip, conflict, or crisis instead of working toward solutions and group stability are just toxic for any community because they cause unnecessary stress, break down trust, and pull everyone's energy away from getting things done. Watch out for folks who make big claims about what they can do, what they've got, or what they know but can't or won't actually prove it. Because when things go bad, you need people who deliver, not just talk a big game. And if someone can't keep a confidence, shares info they shouldn't, or just shows poor judgment about security, that's a big sign they can't be trusted with sensitive knowledge about your group's plans or weaknesses. And those trust violations usually point to deeper character issues that'll only get worse as your relationship grows and the stakes get higher. Building a trusted SHTF community when you're isolated, well, it's not just about getting ready for the worst-case scenarios. It's really about creating those deep, reliable relationships that make life better and safer even during the good times. The same qualities that make someone a solid survival partner also make them a good friend, neighbor, and ally for all the little challenges and opportunities that come up long before any big crisis ever hits. Finding, vetting, and building relationships with like-minded folks takes patience, wisdom, and some strategic thinking. But the time and effort you put into community building now will pay off, not just in a crisis, but in building resilience, growing your capabilities, sharing knowledge, and creating the kind of mutual support that makes everyone's preparedness efforts stronger and more sustainable for the long haul. Start working on these relationships before disaster strikes, because crisis situations show you who people really are. They don't create character. The right time to find out who you can trust is when things are calm and you have the chance to watch how folks act, test their reliability, and slowly build the deep trust that strong communities need. Focus on skill-based alliances and character compatibility instead of getting hung up on perfect ideological agreement or just who's close by. Practical skills and dependable character matter way more than agreeing on every single issue. And the ability to work together under stress comes down to mutual respect and shared commitment to the group, not matching worldviews on everything else. You really don't need a big group to have an effective preparedness community. You just need the right people, with complementary skills, solid character, and a true commitment to mutual support and collective success, not just their own survival. A small group of trusted, capable, committed folks will always outperform a big group of questionable allies when things get tough. Just remember, trust is built through consistent actions over time, not just shared interests or good intentions. Be patient, keep the right boundaries while you're getting to know people, and know that the strongest communities are built on proven reliability, not wishful thinking. The world is, honestly, getting more unpredictable and maybe more dangerous, but it's also full of good people who share your values and concerns about the future. With the right approach to finding and building those relationships, you can create a trusted network that'll help you get through whatever comes your way, and make the journey more meaningful, more enjoyable, and more successful than anything you could ever do alone. So, go ahead and act on these strategies. Start talking with potential community members and begin building the relationships that could make all the difference when the world changes. And you need folks you can count on to face those changes together.